Geographically, Niihau is located 17.5 miles southwest of Kauai, having an area of about 70 square miles, and Mount Paniao is the highest region on the island. The climate of the island is relatively arid and dry due to a lack of elevation, in which a mountain range feature would be able to catch the rainfall and retain moisture that blows in from the trade winds, much like how the ʻōlelo in the Oahu does. In 1864, Elizabeth Hutchinson Sinclair from Scotland purchased Niihau from King Kamehameha IV for $10,000 in gold. The Sinclairs were an industrious, hardworking family and were known as successful farmers and merchants. Her descendants Bruce and Keith Robinson are the present-day owners of Niihau, and both are devoted to protect the land, the island inhabitants, and their indigenous culture. All of the inhabitants of Niihau are native speakers of Hawaiian. In 1778, Captain Cook observed the island as being treeless. Aubrey Robinson, the grandfather of the current owners of the island, is said to have planted over 10,000 trees per year during his ownership of the island to help promote rainfall. And during times of drought, residents of the island are helicoptered to nearby Kauai to wait out the drought. The island of Niihau is nicknamed the Forbidden Island because in the 1930s, the owners of Niihau closed the island to visitors. There were about 350 native inhabitants at the time. Even relatives of the people who lived there had difficulty getting permission to visit the island. The Robinsons terminated any visitations from the outsiders because the indigenous Hawaiians on the island were susceptible to diseases. Today, passage to the island isn't given to just anybody. Rock stars and movie stars have been turned down to land helicopters there in the past. Although presently the owners to the island, Bruce and Keith Robinson, allow helicopter tours and small hunting parties to the island. The hunters are restricted to specific areas and aren't allowed to intermingle or disrupt the lives of the Hawaiians who live there. In 1995, roughly 8,000 wild boar, 12,000 wild sheep, and 1,600 head of cattle was counted. Today, the resident population of Niihau is anywhere between 100 to 150 Hawaiians. A great many of them go to Kauai for work, for school, or medical care. And there are no grocery stores, but a weekly barge brings food and supplies to the families who live there. The Robinson family have had business enterprises on Niihau in which the local residents were employed and made a living. However, these businesses have been in decline. The sugar plantations and the raising of cattle no longer can provide income for the residents, so they look towards Kauai for employment. Approximately 80% of Niihau's income comes from the government's naval installation on the mountain. This generates a stable income for the owners and its inhabitants. The island is best known for its shell jewelry and in one time their hand-weaved mats. Also, the Hawaii Department of Education operates a Niihau kindergarten through 12th grade school there. The school is totally powered by solar panels and about 25 to 30 students attend.
In January 1983, a group of Hawaiian language educators, Ile Benyamina, Hokulani Cleland, Kawanoe Kamana, Larry Kimura, Noea Warner, Koki Williams, and Pila Wilson met to discuss ways to perpetuate the Hawaiian language. From speaking with Manaleo, they realized that raising a child in an environment where Hawaiian was the ordinary language was a key point to the survival of the language. Thus, the idea of re-establishing Hawaiian medium education schools that existed during the monarchical period came about. And so, Punanaleo was created. Its name meaning the nest of voices is where children who were enrolled in this private preschool were taught in Hawaiian. By putting Manaleo in the classroom with the children, they could easily learn the language because they are surrounded by native speakers. In 1984, the first Punanaleo was established in Kekaha, Kauai, and in the following year in Hilo, Hawaii and Honolulu, Oahu, and eventually in the other islands as well. Because of the preschools, Hawaiian immersion public schools were now emerging. In 1988, in Pearl City, Oahu, Kekula Kaiapuni Oa'iau opened its doors to all who wanted to be immersed in the Hawaiian language. Now, there are 21 Hawaiian immersion schools statewide, 4 on Hawaii Island and Maui, 2 on Molokai, 6 on Oahu, and 4 on Kauai, and 1 on Niihau. You can now get your bachelor's and master's degree at the universities of Hawaii at Manoa and Hilo, and you can get your PhD at the University of Hawaii at Hilo in Indigenous Languages and Culture Revitalization. Although the language is well on its way, it still faces many obstacles.
A major concern that the immersion schools are facing today are the standardized tests. The Hawaiian immersion schools, or Kaiapuni, fought for many years to get the standardized testing in the Hawaiian language, but less than half of these students are afforded the opportunity, and the Hawaiian language translated tests are now being challenged. When the states, Kaiapuni successfully got the HSA exams translated, they hadn't field tested its version, and when a test is translated from one language to another, there are questions concerning its validity. Donalyn Dela Cruz, a spokeswoman for the State Department of Education, stated, "The challenge, while Hawaiian is an official language, not all words translate into Hawaiian." The Kaiapuni educators want the opportunity to partner with the DOE to develop a linguistically and culturally accurate test. The current exam isn't even written in the state of Hawaii. A Big Island charter school that educates students in the Hawaiian language claims the State Department of Education released rankings unfairly, implying the school is failing. The school scored a 20 out of a possible 400 in the state's new performance system. The principal blames the low score on the lack of appropriate Hawaiian language test, which is leading the parents to boycott the state's assessment test. Many students are doing poorly because learning in one language and testing in another puts them in a major disadvantage. The Department of Education is working to tackle the complex issues with help from funds appropriated by the state legislature. Since 2002, the DOE has spent $3 million on the immersion testing development. The state is aware of the concerns and is committed to ensuring it meets federal and state requirements along with the needs of all the immersion students. Legislators say because of funding, only about a fourth of all Kaiapuni students are able to actually take the exam. It's not only the students that are suffering, but also the schools. In continuing the effort of revitalizing the Hawaiian language, a growing number of schools are offering an education that centers on the language about half of the states. 33 charter schools are Hawaiian-focused or Hawaiian immersion. There are also Hawaiian immersion schools and programs within the department. The Hilo-based school recently started a satellite program in Nanakuli, in Oahu, because a group of parents wanted more Hawaiian language options on the Waianae coast. The program is starting with 5 kindergartners who are graduates of the Punani Leo o Waianae, a Hawaiian language preschool.
Niihau has paved the way in the revitalizing of the Hawaiian language. It was from their strength in the language that set the establishment of the immersion programs in the state of Hawaii.